I left architecture, practicing the traditional sense of architecture, when I realized that what that built environment needs is really a further study and exploration of human connections and relationships. And I'm really in that intersection between property, tech, social impact, and community, and I'm going to share a little bit about that today. There are two questions that I get asked. Not my slide. There are two questions that I get asked often about how I founded Small Shift and Paper Plane. One is, here we go. One is, what's your best idea? What's your brightest idea? And the other is, what has been your biggest failures, the massive failures? And the truth is, there hasn't been that one single light bulb moment or that one single massive fall, but rather it's been a series of little flickers and tiny slips that help me pivot along the way and validate ideas. Of course, when I do come up with an idea, I think it is the most brilliant idea there ever existed for maybe the first 5 minutes. Then I get to validate the idea, talk to people, and realize that's not, I mean, there's hundreds of times, thousands of times this happened, right? But here's my actual journey, is the series of flickers and slips, and that's what my life looks like. I've had this moment already, this morning, before breakfast. And that journey really starts with me. So I was born in Seoul, South Korea. And I lived here, a master planned community, which was built during the 1988 Seoul Olympics to house the press and the athletes. 5,500 units, 122 apartment blocks, like the one that I'm standing on the top of, which rises up to 24 stories. It was a good place to grow up for me. I have fond memories. It might look a little bit grim on the picture, but tens of thousands of people moved in at the same time, and we brought our kind of differences as well as values. And it was an opportunity to kind of mingle and see how that goes. And it was more of a social experiment. And this is what it used to look like on the ground level. They look a little bit gray and sterile, maybe a little bit monotonous, maybe lacking a little bit of community identity. Same sort of steel bars in the playground, sand pits, same sort of apartment buildings, gray everywhere with repeated openings. Landscaping was managed by management with do not touch signs everywhere. But the residents also, maybe because we all moved in at the same time, it created this kind of culture that was specific to that community. And I know this was in the 80s, right? So only about 35 years after the devastation of the Korean War, during which everything really was destroyed. So my parents' generation didn't really live in apartments at all. My generation was born into apartments. I mean, everybody of my age group will have been born into apartments. So it was kind of a new thing for us as well. And it was interesting because every apartment block like this, 24 stories, 2 households on each floor, there was kind of this monthly community meeting, and this is at the national scale, not just us. And every unit, every household would take turns to host that community meeting and then talk about things like how to keep the children safe, or if they have any suggestions for the town council to do something better, or to agree that let's not play the piano after 7 p.m. or let's not bounce the balls in the units. So there was this kind of informal contract between the neighbors to look out for each other, to make life easier for each other, maybe because they didn't have much of a choice. You have to get along and collaborate. And that was aided by the fact that in a common space like here, people were able to have casual, informal, regular interactions that would complement the formality of those meetings. Then my family moved from here, 3rd level, that's our window, to Christchurch in the early 90s.
When we arrived in the 90s, there was no such thing as like laptops or individual mobile phones. We had one computer in the household. Internet was a luxury, and calling overseas was so expensive that we only got calls when somebody had passed away back home. In that context, social isolation that we experienced, missing our neighbors, the tight-knit community, our family and friends, was a dark, sticky black hole that sucked up all of our energy and confidence and dignity. It's very tough times. We didn't speak much English. On the streets, they told us through small gazes, actions, and words that we didn't belong there. We didn't know anyone, so we rounded up our courage and knocked on our neighbors' doors. We ended up sharing tools, sharing meals, and 25 years on, we got through the earthquakes together. On the 22nd of February 2011, our neighbor Newman, that's his name, Newman, he has Seinfeld reference, if you know about time. He probably doesn't know I'm speaking about him everywhere in Australia. He was the first one to arrive at the scene at my parents' house to check up on them and also to fix their water tank immediately before any government, any services, or any tradies. And I really want to quote the social scientist Ray Oldenburg's, it's from his book here. When people care for one another, they take an interest in their welfare, and this is a vastly superior form of welfare than that obtained by governmental programs. It's based on mutual consent, genuine empathy, and real understanding of people's situations. Nobody is a case. So community relationships that are built bottom-up outlive us, the professionals, yeah? And you would think that if that's that important, even to be included by Resilient Sydney in their action plan, neighborly relationships, awesome. Then surely people would understand this, and people would fully grasp that opportunity to participate in democracy. But this is me. I'm sure a lot of you have been that person as well. Hands up if you've been that guy. Yeah, okay. We've all been there. Here's me. What actually happens is we're up there waving hands. Hey guys, have a say. You have this opportunity to participate in democracy. And people don't exactly jump at the opportunity, right? And I'm like, being Korean, I was thinking like, if this was in North Korea, it would be a different story. It's because there are so many barriers to getting to that opportunity, from tangible reasons like you may not have the money to get to the town hall, or the physical built environment is preventing you from participating because you're a wheelchair user, or intangible reasons like you don't have the confidence to actually participate in the conversation, or that you don't believe that you having a voice and having a say actually has an impact. So what I would love to do is to hear from you now as to what you've experienced in your career, in your work. What are the 3 biggest barriers that you have seen in your communities? So how does this work? You have to pull up your phone, get onto the app. Time is money, so I'll give you 17 seconds. And Ray here is going to pull up the results on the screen. Awesome. So we're seeing some dominant reasons here. Time, perception of influence, disconnection to benefit, access. I wonder what others are. Who's got others? Yeah? What are? Yep, trust. Politics, yep. Good one, cool, awesome. Well, I wanted to, we'll keep going, and you can see the results throughout the conference. So the work that we do at Small Shift, I need to go back to the screen, sorry. So the work that we do at Small Shift is really related to removing those barriers. Having worked in the environment with councils and bigger bodies where strategic planning and strategic decisions are made, those are bigger questions and bigger decisions that the community may not feel that they have influence over. So at Small Shift, we really wanted to focus on things that they may have some influence over, and change that conversation going, okay, well, we're not the management or the authority, but rather we are the facilitator and the supporter for the ideas that they have that they want to implement. This is not building a bridge. These are small ideas and things that like DIY scale that they themselves implement with our help. And our intention is to encourage small shifts of the community mindset and changing their expectations, such as why isn't the council doing everything? Also creating small shifts or small jobs for people with barriers to employment. And 17% spoke to influence, and that's something that we really want to have an impact on, is that the opportunity here with small projects is that they can immediately see how they've influenced the project outcome. And the concept began 4 years ago, before even Small Shift was born, when I partnered with Rough Edges and Darlinghurst to test this assumption that places that are co-created with the community will be sustained into the future, even in the most highly vandalized places. Rough Edges is a charity in Darlinghurst. It's a safe place and a free cafe for people experiencing homelessness. But it also caters for people who live in social housing, and it's really for everybody. It serves people who really need that sense of belonging, but often get left out in the conversations about city making. I saw, when I was volunteering there in the kitchen, I saw this opportunity for the building frontage to have more pride and tell the story about the street community and what's going on in there. It's a context, this is a small cafe that sits on a very commercialized main street with all the bars and shops and restaurants. So we got a small grant from the City of Sydney and ended up working with about 30 Rough Edges patrons, as well as the wider community, to really give it a makeover. We ended up painting a mural, putting up a street library, adding more greenery, and a bench, so that people who would come and visit the shop, even outside the cafe hours, were welcome to spend time there. And before we implemented the project, of course, there were lots of voices of concerns about what if syringes are left in the bookshare, what if the planters are stolen, we should chain them up, somebody's gonna come and tag the mural. Nothing like that has happened in the last 3 years. And these are the critical assumptions that I wanted to test through that 2-year pilot project. One was that people who experience homelessness and who live in social housing have talent that can contribute to city making. 2 is that they are willing to, they have the desire to contribute, either as volunteers or employees. And that our DIO do-it-ourselves projects have social impact, and as a business, as a social enterprise, that the landowners are willing to pay for our services. And today, through our DIO do-it-ourselves projects, we bring people together from different backgrounds. We work on projects together and use those as a vehicle to increase social cohesion, as well as hire people with barriers to employment in the greater Sydney area. This is the Seaforth project that Nina mentioned. In this DIO Seaforth project, Plaza was built about 2 years ago, and until we stepped in to help the locals to connect with each other, come up with ideas, and to actually implement those ideas, it used to look like this. Pretty gray, sterile, and mostly unloved, because the locals didn't know how to start a conversation and how to start a project. But what we really focus on is not just those fun painting implementation days. It's actually what happens after. What happens to the chalkboard? What happens to the toys or the hopscotch or whatever it may be? And when Nina shared with me her beautiful daughter drawing on the chalkboard, I was very excited because that's exactly what our success looks like, is that it is used, and also that the plants are watered, the chalkboard is always clean, and the toys are always put back in place by the community and by the cafe owner who's been instrumental in making this happen. This is our adaptation of IDEO's design thinking approach, where the community is always involved through the whole process. The key here is not to run a workshop or talk to the people and try and reach forced consensus. It's not about getting 80% agreeing on something and 20% not agreeing, hence going with the 80%. It's actually about sharing the perspectives and deciding together on what to implement, because that has impact, and also because the ideas are driven by somebody. So that kind of ownership is really critical in the likelihood of the ideas and implementation being sustained into the future and being well looked after. Why do we encourage people to go DIY or DIO? There's a theory. It's called the IKEA Effect. Has anyone heard of this? Awesome. I think about this when I put up my IKEA furniture. So Harvard Business School conducted a series of experiments, and they asked the participants to create things like an IKEA storage box and an origami crane, and I think there was some sort of frog thing. And they asked them to put a value on the things that they made themselves in a kind of amateurish way. They also asked the participants to put a value on things that were made by professionals perfectly. And what the study found is that those values put on the two different categories were similar, but only if their amateurish creation was good enough, right? If you made something like an origami crane, it looked like an absolute shit that you don't feel good about yourself. So it's quite important that the task is achievable. And here are three things that we try and achieve. One is relationship building, obviously. We do that all the time. It's time consuming, but not too hard. Then there's the data collection. Whenever we engage communities, we want to collect as much data as possible and to learn about their aspirations and values and needs. And the third thing, which is probably the most difficult, is mobilization. How do you enable community members to connect with each other and take lead? And mobilization is really important because this is scalable, right? You plant the seed and they can go out into the wide world and do things for themselves and create impact on their own. And I spent years working with different community members that are community champions, essentially, that tend to lead these processes. And I've been trying to figure out who these people are, what are their commonalities or differences, and who are these people? Is it demographic, or is it a personality thing? And it turns out community champions aren't born as such. And you're not a community champion throughout your whole entire life. It's quite a dynamic kind of a journey. You might be a community champion for something that you really deeply care about if you're into environmental sustainability, for example. You might be really into recycling. May not be so much into mural painting. Community champions are inspired by the behaviors that they see in their neighbors and friends and family, and they pick up these behaviors. They're shaped into community champions, and they in turn demonstrate to the rest of the community the new norm. We want our communities to self-organize and self-sustain and find their own solutions. And I wanted to share with you the 6 principles that Small Shift uses that might be helpful. One is free to choose, about freedom, but freedom with boundaries. With our DIO projects, if you give them completely blank space. What do you want? Have a say. Totally lost and all different tangents, yeah? But if you give them some boundaries, okay, here's how much we've got, here's the timeline that our funder is looking for, et cetera, then you can really focus on what's achievable. We worked on a project still going on in Telopia, which is a pretty disadvantaged suburb in Sydney, where we invited the community members to come along and have a say, have a discussion about how we can improve the neighborhood. All participants happened to be women, and they were really worried about their safety in public spaces, because when they go out in front of the shops and they're seating, there's always men who have obviously been drinking, and they're scared to spend time there. And they said, why doesn't the police come and patrol this area? It should be done 24/7. And we talked about it and said, look, is it possible? What is it that we can do to create a better sense of safety for everyone and change the perception of that public space so that there's no more drinking or people behave differently? And now we are working on, as they say, brightening up the space through mural painting, which is led by Darug Elder and a local indigenous artist. Second, achievable task. This refers to the IKEA Effect. Don't give people what they can't do. Let them choose. Make sure that they're capable. Give them as much support. This guy in a workshop, he didn't want to have a say in a survey. He didn't want to come to a workshop. Not interested in a discussion. But he did want to swap coins. And that's the process that we use to have a chat with him, going, okay, well, that's the way you want to engage. That's the achievable task for him. Collaborators. We're very lucky in the sense that because our work is very much on the ground and doing stuff, taking action, it tends to only attract people who are interested in taking action as well. So there are virtually no naysayers in the room. And that really changes the dynamic in the room. And people who come to the meetings or the workshops or the discussions, they're not really inspired by me, right? I could talk and talk and talk, but they don't care. They inspire each other because they all know the local problems and they understand the potential solutions that's going to change the area and the neighborhood. After finishing each of our projects, there's always this moment of silence when all the participants are kind of standing back, looking at what we created, whether it be a chalkboard or mural or whatever it may be. And we didn't agree to have that moment of silence, but everybody's just proud, looking at the mural. And this is such an amazing bonding moment. Influence, seeing and feeling the impact. People who come want to know that their effort and time, energy have been spent for the right reason. This is in Kingswood, another disadvantaged suburb in Sydney. And a community member wanted to trial a food pantry in a park. You can imagine what kind of opposition she had from her fellow neighbors as well, going, that's never gonna last, never gonna last. It's gonna be destroyed overnight. But she was so passionate because she had already done this. She actually created like a box and she left it outside of her house on the footpath with cans of food for anybody to take. One night, somebody had come, took the food out of the box, left it on the footpath, and took the box. She was very upset. Because she's the community champion and trying to do good, and she said, look, Julia, we need to concrete this in. And that's what happened. And the community was like, well, we want to have street libraries. Mission Australia was like, yeah, we're going to paint one. It's going to be only for kids. we wanted to create one for adults, and the community champion was like, we gotta have one for food, and we can just try it. And I said to her, okay, cool, like you're one of the few that actually think this is gonna work. I don't know, we can try it, but will you look after it? Because if there's no one looking after it, it's gonna be trash. So we painted some planters, put some plants in, beautiful project, and I wanted to watch how this went, right? It's been about 2-3 months. There were 2 occasions when everything out of the streetlights were taken off and thrown onto the park, where one of the guys told me a lot of syringes, more syringes are found in the park, which is really unfortunate because right next to it is a children's playground. So I watched them. I didn't jump in. I just wanted to see what's going to happen. This is all going on Facebook. People are like, look at this, what we created. All these people jumping in. This is disgraceful, no respect. I'm gonna come and put more food in, restock. I'm gonna pick up all the books, and I'm gonna make sure that all the plants are better shape than before. Amazing, amazing result that we're really happy with, because we know that it's those people who's gonna make sure that this project survives beyond small shifts involvement. So I was really pleased when one of the community champions got featured in the local newspaper, because he's been working so hard with the community for decades. And it's really important for those community champions to be acknowledged and be thanked. And they're not really looking for rewards. They're not looking for monetary rewards. But what they do like is those little kind thank yous, and there's currently not enough channels for people to communicate that. And the last principle that I want to share is about tech. But before I get into that, there's another poll question for you, another 17 seconds. If you go back to your phone, let's try and pick out of the 4 choices how much impact tech will have in your work. Awesome. If we can flick back. 66%, huge impact. Virtually 0% for no impact. That's really amazing. And the reason why I asked this is because working in community engagement and running workshops and surveys and whatnot, it's so much work. It's very manual. It can be one-off. And sometimes, more often than not, that effort and momentum is not sustained into the future when the staff changes or when we exit from that project. So I've been thinking about how do we use technology to complement what we do on the ground, because face-to-face is really important. But it's really hard when you are trying to run a workshop. You have to organize it. You have to book a venue, get catering, get people to register. It's just a lot of work, and it's really hard to make small decisions along the project journey. So instead of kind of us being in there, how do we leverage technology so that the community can engage amongst themselves without us before and after and during our project, was the question that I had. But the existing platforms, Facebook was mentioned by Councillor Simon, as well as other social media and email and WhatsApp and whatnot, they have limitations in terms of the 2 points that I made earlier, which is about community mobilization. How do you stop people from just having that digital interaction rather than collective action and meeting face-to-face? Then there's the data collection. How do we collect data in a meaningful way that really helps our projects? And this is why Paper Plane exists, my second business, which is a tech startup based in Sydney. So I've kind of dedicated my career to solving this one problem. That's two-sided. One is the root cause of the problem is that the communities don't have a tool to self-organize and mobilize themselves. And 2 is that the governments and property developers spend a lot of money on community handholding because of that lack of tool which results in a lower unknown return on investment. So we wanted to be able to measure the impact, but also make sure that those processes are sustained by the community. So Paper Plane is a community building or community self-organization tool that helps them mobilize themselves. It's designed to enable residents to meet face-to-face, collaborate, and belong. And on the other side, property developers and governments get those insights and live data to know what kind of spaces, programs the communities use, love, and value. So for example, I was talking to this Indian lady, Apexa, who just moved into a master plan community. She's got 2 kids, small children. It's really hard for her to commute anywhere to actually work. She needs to be home around her kids. But she's a fantastic cook. So she's wondering, she's making this homemade Indian street food, and she's wondering, how can I test this idea? Because setting up a restaurant is a lot of risk. It's very expensive, and we see so many vacant shops on the main streets already because small businesses can survive. But then there are other home cooks in the area, in the neighborhood as well. And I'm going, well, okay, Apexa, you're a fantastic home cook who makes food for 7 to 9 p.m. pickup on Saturdays, and you want to test the appetite of your local neighbors. Let's do that, test that before you set up the restaurant or even invest so much money into it. Then collect the data around who else is doing this. And instead of the government or the property developer putting their community budget into running yoga classes or building, I don't know, a water park, is there an opportunity to use the data and insights to build a shared commercial kitchen so that it maintains and have the impact on local economy? So what I really want to see into the future is us moving away from the centralized community engagement model where we are pushing whatever it is we're pushing into the community and collecting the data, but rather distributing the power to the community members themselves so that they can go out there and do things on their own, even after the black dot, us, exit. And to finish off, I want to share my little slips as well, not just my light bulb moments. One is that we have to find our own metrics. It's really easy to be fooled to think that the number of likes is engagement, the level of engagement, because that's what social media tells us. We didn't go down that road, but we did go down the road of using the Australian Social Value Bank's calculator, which it was a fantastic tool, but it didn't really work for us because the way it's measured is they measure the change that occurs in an individual from the start of the project to the end date of the project. And for us, those individuals are not exactly the same. So find your own metrics. Second, look for actions and traction. Ask people what they want, and they'll tell you many things. I talked to a guy who is a community champion. He ran a photography workshop, and he said to the community, hey, I'm going to run this workshop for free. Anybody interested? 100+ people said, yeah, yes. Then he put it out there again. Okay, I set the date, booked the venue. How many people are actually going to come? 50 people said, definitely, I'm going to be there. How many people? You know where I'm going. 16 people came. It's a good number, 16%. But we see this a lot, is that people will say lots of things, and we really need to be cautious of what people say, but rather measure their traction and actions instead. I still make this mistake a lot, which is holding onto that chalk, literally. I'm out there on the ground. I'm an architect. I know what I'm doing. And start to draw, and then I realize I'm doing all the work. I have to stop. So once I stopped, this guy and others picked up the chalk and started to do the work in a different way, but in a perfect way. And every time I have to remind myself, stop that urge to take over, stop being the lead. To finish, I want to share this photograph of my dad. He's on the left. Just FYI. And they're being thanked by the mayor of Christchurch for his contribution to the New Zealand police, helping them connect with the Korean community. It took a long time for my family to settle in and be connected to the community in New Zealand, but eventually we did with the support from our neighbors and community, and we have been able to give back. Some people may not look like leaders. Some people may not speak like leaders or speak the language. But they will step into power when given the opportunity. And I think our job is to just to gently nudge them to take that step. Thank you so much.